Now, we can show you some images now outside Israel. This is dramatic image of a US Army Patriot battery, a Patriot missile defense battery intercepting incoming Iranian ballistic missiles. This time, not in Israel. This is Erbil in Iraq, one of multiple locations around the region where there are US facilities and where the Iranian regime is targeting, because they've made it clear that in addition to striking Israel, it's always a target that suffers the wrath of Iran anytime they feel minded. But of course, it's those US bases around that region that are now also the target. We've seen it before in the past, where some bases have been targeted in the likes of Iraq and in Syria, maybe Jordan. But today, the action, the retaliatory strikes are much more widespread, taking in Bahrain, taking in Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates. We've seen the interceptions in the skies over Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So real concern in these areas, because you can see from the images that we've been showing you, so many tourists in these areas, people in their apartment buildings like this, watching explosions that are not that far away from where they are. They will have felt and heard the blasts of these explosions in the middle distance there. So some real concern.
And a number of flights from the United Kingdom to that region have been cancelled this morning. Well, let's now speak to the former UK ambassador to Iran and senior fellow Nicholas Hopton. Nicholas, good morning to you. You obviously know Iran and Tehran quite well. What do you think, what's the sense you would be getting from ordinary Iranian citizens at this point in time? Because President Trump is calling for them to essentially take over the governance of the country. How realistic is that, and how much of a gamble has President Trump deployed this morning?
Good morning. I think there will be mixed emotions among many in Tehran at this point. They will have heard President Trump's rhetoric this morning and will be feeling how much can they trust that, given that we've heard from President Trump in the past that he was going to help the Iranian people in January when they protested in an unprecedented way, and yet it's taken over a month before these strikes, and the Iranian protesters were massacred in January. So I don't know whether they will respond en masse to the president's appeal for them to rise up. I also think there will be a sense that they've been here before. We saw US and Israeli strikes last June in the middle of negotiations that were taking place between the US and Iran. So I think it's quite possible there'll be a sense of skepticism probably in Tehran and a wish to see how the wind blows, how things develop in the next 24, 48 hours.
As you say, Nicholas, Donald Trump was promising help back in January. We then saw the massacre of so many ordinary Iranian citizens. Why has there been this long delay? We had a guest on earlier in Tel Aviv saying that the delay is simply because Donald Trump knew that if he wanted to properly take out the regime, he would have to wait to get his ducks in a row, get his nuclear arsenal assembled. Do you think that's all the delay was, just a means of getting the military capacity together to launch a strong attack on the Ayatollahs?
Well, clearly there's been a massive build-up of US military might in the region over the last month. That's been slow and steady and is now at a very heavy pressure, putting a heavy pressure on Tehran, and now is going into action. What is unclear, however, is what exactly President Trump and the US want to achieve through military action, because the objectives keep, as stated by the White House, keep changing. So just last week, we were hearing how President Trump really wanted to have a deal. and his negotiators met with the Iranian foreign minister in Geneva. And there was even some suggestion that although no deal was in sight, there had been some positive progress on Thursday. And now we see military action. So this morning, President Trump isn't talking about deals at all, or even necessarily achieving the stated objectives of that negotiation, stopping Iran ever having nuclear weapon capability. It seems to be moving towards regime change, which is, of course, much more the Israeli position. So it's unclear not only what the objectives of this military action at the moment are, what the legal basis for it are, given we've yet to see the evidence presented which would justify this action, and whether the United States and its allies, its ally, because there's only really Israel who's joined in supporting this action, whether there is an end game, that a plan that has been worked up.
Well, how likely is regime change in Iran? Reuters is reporting that several senior Revolutionary Guard commanders and political officials have been killed in those strikes this morning. They're citing an Iranian source close to the establishment. How much would that news destabilise the governance of the country?
Certainly, it would be very destabilizing. And I've seen the reports that the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Islamic Revolutionary Guard, has been assassinated in these strikes. We understand the supreme leader, Khamenei, is in hiding somewhere outside Tehran. So I don't know whether it's credible, some other reports that he may have been targeted. But as last summer, when we saw Israel strike the top of the regime and succeed in assassinating, killing a large number of military commanders and other senior figures in the Islamic regime, that did not lead to regime change. And this is not Venezuela. I think it's important to stress that. So it's not a case simply of removing the supreme leader and then being able to put a new Western-friendly government in place. This is a much more complicated country with a hydra of leadership centers, and it will be very complicated for the United States to go beyond destabilizing the regime, which they're doing, from there to get somehow to putting in place a Western-friendly, democratic-respecting government in Iran.
Well, Nicholas Hopton, former UK ambassador to Iran, thank you very much for taking the time to join us on GB News this morning. And we're joined now by Ruth Eglash, editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report. Ruth, you're in Israel, I gather. Can you talk to us about where you are, what's happening where you are, what's the atmosphere on the ground?
Well, just as I was waiting to come on air, I heard a big explosion outside of my window, but we didn't have sirens here. I'm located just outside of Jerusalem, but we have been dashing in and out of the bomb shelter all morning since around 8:30 a.m. Or 8:10, actually, to be more precise, when the first siren went off here, when the Defense Minister Israel Katz announced that Israel had struck sites in Iran. And we've just basically been staying close to home. I mean, the police put out a statement telling citizens to stay at home, to not undertake any unnecessary travel anywhere. And we are hearing, and I think your colleague mentioned it earlier, we're hearing that some of the missiles did get through the Iron Dome and the Arrow defense systems that Israel has in place. And people have been, some places have been hit by either missiles or the shrapnel falling from the missiles. So it feels very tense here. But, you know, we have been in this scenario before, and Israelis are very well prepared for this. We went through it for 2 weeks in June, and there was a few other days here and there. And obviously, we've been in a tense situation here since October 7th. So, you know, we've just been waiting for this particular round of fighting between Israel, Iran, or US and Iran to kick off.
And Ruth, we are hearing reports now that a new wave of missiles has just been launched from Iran, heading in your direction. So do stay safe. But in terms of the general mood of the Israeli citizens in the region, waking up to this news this morning, having all this incoming, do they support the government's actions here in launching preemptive strikes against Iran? And what do they hope, normal citizens, this will achieve?
Well, I think Israelis have been watching very closely, as much as they can, the events that have been happening in Iran and to the Iranian people over the last few months. But, this tension between Israel and Iran has been going on for many, many years. And Netanyahu, who's been prime minister here for most of the last 20 years, has been warning the public about Iran's nuclear capability. We've been subjected to Iranian proxies who have been attacking Israel from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Yemen, and obviously I mentioned October 7th from Gaza. And so, there is sort of this feeling of relief that maybe this phase of this war could bring about some change, could bring about kind of a calmer situation afterwards. But, I think, as the ambassador mentioned just prior to me, that, it's very complicated. It's not straightforward. Regime change is something that's a very complicated step to happen. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see and hope that none of these missiles manage to get through Israel's very sophisticated defense systems.
And are Israel and the US on exactly the same page over this? Obviously, Israel is pushing for a full regime change. Donald Trump is being less clear about exactly what he wants from these strikes. And it's not completely clear how much US force he's willing to put into this. Would you say that Israel and America are on the same page?
Well, I might not have said that up until today, but listening to President Trump's speech earlier and listening to Netanyahu's, it seems like word for word that they are on the same page here. And obviously, we've been watching over the last few weeks the massive buildup of US troops in the region, not just in Israel or around Israel, but also in the other places that have been struck this morning in Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia. So, we are seeing that the US, or it feels like from here that the US is committed to carrying this out.
Ruth, in the last few moments, we've had some breaking news via the Reuters news agency reporting that at least 24 people have been killed in an Israeli strike on a school in Iran's southern county of Minab. Various reports suggest that it's a girls' elementary school with 5 students being killed. Of course, this is going to be leading to civilian casualties on both sides of the conflict.
Yeah, no, I mean, we saw that during the last round of fighting in June. There were many casualties in Israel. There was a lot of destruction here. Obviously, every civilian death in any conflict is a terrible tragedy. And, it feels exhausting after more than 2 years of war in this region. So, I guess the most that we can hope for is that this brings about some changes, some real changes in the region, and maybe we can look towards a more peaceful future.